There's something else that struck me while watching Logan Paul's response video to Coffeezilla's series about him. You see, he throws out a number of allegations about a number of people that just for Logan's sake, I really hope is true, because it would be terribly ironic if in a video where he's throwing around the word defamation about Coffeezilla, if in fact in that very video, he is actually defaming a number of people.
According to Logan's piece, this is crime details from the year 2002. So again, I couldn't find anything under this name, under that specific district court, so it really made me wonder, is this actually public information? Now, I decided to get both sides of the story and ask Zach Kelling myself, and according to Zach Kelling, the record is in fact expunged, according to what he has told me.
Oh, this is so much worse. So I recently published a video talking about the legal mistakes that Logan Paul may have made in his response videos to Coffeezilla's 3-part series on him and Cryptozoo and the possibility of them being an alleged scam. And in response to that, I got a number of questions from people asking for more information or more analysis on Developer Z, who Logan Paul outed as Zach Kelling. First, if you haven't seen that first video, it's linked in the description below. You might want to watch that first. But otherwise, let's continue on. So specifically, a lot of people pointed to a particular video that was put on the channel Some Ordinary Gamers, run by a guy by the name of Mudahar. In reviewing this whole mess, Mudahar actually reached out to and got in contact with Zach Kelling. And upon further research, I found that Zach has actually also posted some things onto Facebook in his own defense. So in this video, we're going to take and analyze this new information and see how it changes this whole situation. And boy, does it change things. Specifically, in my opinion, it makes things worse for Logan Paul. We'll show some pieces from Mudahar's video, also linked in the description below, but first let's take a look at this Facebook post by Zach Kelling. So this is a post by Zach Kelling on Facebook on January 5th, 2023. Update: Logan has finally removed the defamatory video. Thank you for all the support. And then it goes to what looks like the original post, which says, "Dear friends and colleagues, as some of you may have seen, I have been personally attacked by blogger Logan Paul on his YouTube channel. As I care deeply about the well-being, reputations, and continued success of all my colleagues, partners, investors, and our associated work, I am writing to address the core of his claims here. Firstly, I made mistakes 20 years ago, which I deeply regret, and yes, these gave me a criminal record. I have since been granted an expungement and have worked very hard to move forward with my life and career. I believe that everyone has the right to lead a dignified life, and I have worked very hard to build a decent life for myself, my family, and everyone around me. I speak openly with friends, colleagues, and investors about my history who have and continue to express support for me and my work. I am writing a book this year about my entrepreneurial journey and how I was able to overcome adversity and build meaningful multi-billion-dollar businesses and hundreds of open source projects and help millions of developers in my professional career. Secondly, I am an investor in an original CTO of Cryptozoo. The devs are still owed over $1 million USD by Cryptozoo and 5% tokens. I am happy to share the GitHub, which shows it was indeed a heroic effort by over 30 folks. In fact, Logan used my good name and reputation in the crypto community to raise money for this project. I worked really hard on Cryptozoo and we all wished for it to be successful. We quit the project because Logan didn't pay us for our services rendered. In closing, I would like to sincerely thank everyone for the outpouring of support that I have received in the past few days in light of these attacks. My legal counsel will be following up with Logan and the Cryptozoo team to address their claims directly. All my best, Zach." Oh, Logan, what did you do? So, according to Zach, there were some significant problems with some of the things that Logan was saying in his response video to Coffeezilla. So let's go through 3 of the main claims that Logan made here. First was that Logan claimed that Zach had stolen the code or held it hostage.
Coffee, you interviewed the developer who stole the game code, fled to Switzerland, and held it hostage for $1 million.
Second was Logan claimed that the 30 developers that Zach claimed that he was working with or that he had hired for the project were actually only 3.
I guess among many things, it doesn't surprise me that he lied about having 30 engineers and a $50,000 a week burn rate.
On my end, I have 30 engineers. I'm burning $50,000 a week.
Which, side note, is how this delusionist landed on the $1 million code ransom, but it turns out he only had 3 engineers.
And finally, Logan claimed that Zach Kelling supposedly had been convicted of a felony, specifically armed robbery of a liquor store.
Surely, as the internet detective that you proclaim to be, you would know that he spent time in prison for multiple felonies, one for aggravated robbery, armed robbery at a liquor store, and the other for, surprise, obstructing the legal process. I can see why you kept him anonymous. Wouldn't someone with journalistic integrity know their credible source had not only an agenda, but a fondness for orange jumpsuits? Or did you just hear what you wanted to hear and moved on?
So let's start with the first one, the claim that he had stolen the code or held it hostage overseas. Now, in Coffeezilla's original series, Zach was on audio saying that he had not been paid previously, which was why he took the code with him.
Now, obviously, the first thing I wanted to do was hunt down this developer, who we'll be calling Z here, and find out the truth of what happened. Why did he steal Logan's code for $1 million? However, I finally got a hold of him, and when I did, he admitted he took the code hostage, but he says the reason for it was nothing like what Logan had said.
He literally never paid me anything at all, ever. I never was paid. And, we got to a point when I was working on it where I just realized they were just going to try to steal all of my work and not pay me. And so I took all the source code private, and I just kind of spent like a month just trying to negotiate and get something figured out where I would finally get paid. Because I'm on my end, I have a team of 30 engineers. So I'm earning $50,000 a week on building this thing. And the only thing they brought to the table were a bunch of Photoshop JPEGs.
Now, it seems like one of the first issues here that happened was that there was no written agreement between the parties, between Zach Kelling and Logan Paul and the rest of the team for Cryptozoo.
Now, in all seriousness, I do want to acknowledge something which actually kind of looks bad a bit on the developers, because it turns out very few written contracts were actually done. So much of this were verbal deals like, oh, we'll take care of you. We'll give you $350K. We'll give you $1 million. We'll give you whatever. But then when it was time to actually sign the deals, there's just always delays.
What kind of promises were made to you? Verbal promises, basically. So verbal promises, and then we followed up with a physical paper agreement. But that's when communication broke down.
So it sounds like they didn't have anything reduced down to writing about the scope of work, the payment for services, or who owns the IP and at what various stages people own the IP. Side note, we don't give legal advice on this channel, but for anyone that needs to hear it, this is just general life advice. If you are going to go to work on anything for anyone else, or if you are going to hire someone to work for you for anything for you at all, please go and get it down in writing in some form or another, ideally in some kind of a contract that both have actually signed physically. And do this before anyone starts any kind of work on the project. It makes everything in the project flow so much smoother when everyone can have a clear understanding of what their expectations can be in that project. And it can avoid a lot of these kinds of issues like what we're seeing in this case. But I will say that even in this case, where there apparently wasn't anything reduced down to writing for the scope of work and the payment of services, that a good argument could probably be made that there was a common understanding of some sort of an agreement along a lot of those terms. The evidence that would support that kind of an argument would be the communications between the two parties talking about the scope of work, and then the actual actions by both parties that the other parties know that they are taking that are both in reliance on and in conformity with that common sort of understanding with those communications. But still, it's a harder argument to make than if you have something actually down in writing. And so if the court could find that there is some form of an enforceable agreement between the two parties, where there is a dispute between the two parties, where both sides say that the other side did something wrong, the court is going to try to analyze who breached the contract. And typically what we would look to is who acted outside of the terms of the agreement first. Here, Zach says that he took the code because Logan didn't pay him and refused to pay him.
He literally never paid me anything at all, ever. I never was paid.
This is something that Logan has not disputed as far as I can see. And so if that is true, that would mean that Logan was the one who actually breached the agreement because of the fact that he was the one that was responsible for paying. That was his end of the bargain, was to pay for the services. So if he didn't pay for the services and then he refused to pay for them, that means that he's the one that's actually breached the contract first. So is it defamatory for Logan to say that Zach held the code hostage? To be honest with you, I wouldn't actually call that defamation because of the fact that in order for a statement to be defamatory, it has to be a statement of fact. And this to me sounds like it's more of a statement of an opinion. It's a way that he has characterized the situation. I completely disagree with that characterization personally based on the information that I've heard. Zach did agree that he took the code, but the characterization of the circumstances under which he took it are not exactly the way that Logan was describing them to be. But I still think that that would be likely considered a statement of opinion more so than a statement of fact. But I will say that that is enough of a gray area that I think a jury could potentially come to a different conclusion. So if you found yourself on the jury, what do you think? Do you think that that is defamatory? Do you think that's more of a statement of fact or statement of opinion? Let us know in the comments down below. So let's turn to that second statement, the statement that Zach didn't actually hire 30 developers, but he only hired 3. Zach reaffirmed in that Facebook post that he hired 30 developers, and he said that he is happy to share the information from GitHub. Zach then further maintained the same thing when he spoke with Mudahar over at Some Ordinary Gamers.
Now, I decided to get both sides of the story and ask Zach Kelling myself, who I found through his own website over here and his own GitHub projects, so you can actually see that he's a pretty, active programmer. Of course, Zach even went down into the Facebook post that Logan had showed in his video, and had shown that Logan had apparently cherry-picked it because there was moments where he was contacting with an entire team, as you can see on Discord over here. So there were about 20 different other 30-something odd devs working on Cryptozoo at the time. Of course, this is just Zach's own statements as well too, but of course I wanted to provide both sides and look into exactly what was happening.
So if things are the way that Zach says that they are, it looks like Logan not only lied about this, but did so in a way that was particularly sneaky and, in my opinion, quite possibly with actual malice. As a reminder, in the last video, I said that in my opinion, Zach would probably be treated less like a public figure and more like a private person for purposes of defamation. And because of that, I said that Zach would probably only need to show that Logan was being negligent in the way that he was lying about him in order to show defamation. But let's take it a step further and assume that Zach is in fact a public figure for the purposes of this whole situation. Can Zach show that Logan lied about him with actual malice? Remember first that actual malice is where the defendant has lied about the plaintiff knowing that what they said was false or with reckless disregard as to the truth or falsity of the statement. This is a significant jump up from negligence, and it's very difficult for a lot of people to meet. But here we have evidence that Logan potentially ignored some social media posts about Zach talking to these over 30 people and instead cherry-picked a couple other posts that show photos of 3 individuals or have 3 individuals tagged. To me personally, yeah, that does look like cherry picking, and that does look like he would have had knowledge that what he was saying was not true, or at the very least enough in front of him to stop to ask a couple questions about whether or not what he was looking at was confirming what he was saying, or whether or not the other information that was right in front of him actually was showing the truth. So for this point, yeah, it's definitely possible that Logan could be looking at a defamation claim. But then we get to arguably the most important part of Logan's video, and the most important part, I guess, particularly for Zach Kelling. And that is in reference to Logan's claim that Zach was this felon who had committed an armed robbery of a liquor store. Now, according to Zach, he says, yes, he did have a criminal history. But he says that he never robbed any liquor store. He was a teenager at the time. This was over 20 years ago. And most importantly, this has been expunged. This is super important for our purposes. So let's talk about expungement. Expungement is essentially the process of wiping clean someone's criminal history so that it's as if the criminal history doesn't really exist. Different states treat expungement differently. As an example, California doesn't even really fully have expungement. So it's important to look at the state where the criminal history was to see the process of expungement and what it really means here. In this case, it looks like Logan Paul flashed on the screen a criminal history that was based in the state of Kansas. So let's look at Kansas's law on expungements. So to begin, there are different pathways towards expungement depending on whether the conviction was a juvenile conviction or an adult conviction. In this case, we know that Zach was a teenager. We don't know if he was 18 or 19 or younger than 18. But it does sound like he was suggesting that he was a minor at the time, so let's go in that direction. So if he was a minor, this is the process of expungement for his particular record. So under Kansas law, juveniles with a criminal record can have both the arrest and the court records expunged. However, expungement is not available for certain serious or violent offenses. Here's how the process works for juveniles in Kansas. First, the person has to be at least either 23 years old or at least 2 years have passed since the final discharge. Once that time period has passed, the person can file a petition with the court where the court will have a hearing on it. At the hearing, the court checks for the following conditions. First, there can't have been any subsequent convictions or adjudications against the person. Second, it has to be the case that no other charges are pending against that person. And third, the petitioner's circumstances and behavior have to warrant expungement. Basically, all of this points to a circumstance where someone has done something wrong in the past, but has clearly learned from it and hasn't fallen into the same sort of pattern of behavior that makes it likely that they are going to return to prison. Now, regardless of whether we are talking about juvenile expungements or adult expungements, in Kansas, even with an expungement of a criminal record, the custodian of records has to disclose the existence of those records to various state agencies upon request. So there is some part of this world where those records still continue to exist, but for very limited purposes. Now, because of the sensitivity of these kinds of records, there are some very strict rules about sharing that information. It can't be shared except for in strict accordance with Kansas state law. And the state agency that is requesting the information can only request it if they have a legitimate need for the information. And what's more, the penalties for an improper sharing of expungement information like this can be pretty serious. According to Kansas law, any individual violating or causing a violation of that provision, in other words, improperly sharing the information, is guilty of a Class A non-person misdemeanor. Let me say that again. They are guilty of a Class A non-person misdemeanor for improperly sharing this information. So, okay, then the question comes down to Logan Paul's use of this expungement information. Is that a permissible use? My gut tells me no. But on this channel, we don't just go with our gut. We try to look to case law research, statutory research, whatever we can find to see if that can illuminate the path forward. And here's one case that I found from Kansas. It's a case from 1996 called Patrick v. City of Overland Park. In that case, a Kansas police chief got into some serious hot water for disclosing the expunged criminal record of a political opponent during a political campaign. This was, according to the court, a long-closed and highly sensitive, non-public file. Does that sound familiar? The plaintiff in that case alleged that the purpose of that search was to find damaging information to use against him in the political campaign. And according to the court opinion, the defendant did not claim a legitimate need to search the plaintiff's criminal history. So the court, on a question of whether to dismiss the case or not, decided to allow it to proceed further in the litigation. So in other words, the court agreed that using it for political oppo research is not a legitimate purpose for use of this particular information. Now, there are some important distinctions between that particular case and this case in front of us with Logan Paul and Zach Kelling. Most notably is the fact that this was a civil rights case against a government actor and a government entity acting on behalf of the government or under color of law. Logan Paul is obviously not a government official and not a government entity, so there are some differences between this case and that case. But the important part of that case to note for purposes of this case is the determination that use of an expunged criminal record for political oppo research is not a legitimate purpose. And that's especially where the information is from a long-closed and highly sensitive non-public file. And while Logan Paul is not running for any political office here, we can thank our lucky stars for that, it nonetheless can easily be argued that it's a very similar situation here, essentially because he's running sort of a public relations campaign with this video. The whole purpose of Logan Paul's initial reaction video and his statements on his Impaulsive podcast afterwards was to convince the public at large that this person, Developer Z, also known as Zach Kelling, is not someone who is to be trusted. Now, I don't know how or from whom Logan got this information. It could have been someone in law enforcement, or it could have been an attorney with access to those kinds of tools and resources on something like a Westlaw account. If you're not familiar, Westlaw is a very commonly used legal research tool that is subscription-based that lawyers use for really some of the best legal research that you can get. And it has a lot of different tools that you can use to help in litigation, including getting background checks on all kinds of things. Now, if the person who gave Logan this information is an attorney, there is a decent possibility that they could be facing a license suspension or at the very least some sort of ethics violation ruling. But the question really is about Logan himself. Is he under any sort of potential liability under this kind of statute? Arguably, given the breadth of the language of this particular statute, I think Logan actually could face some legal issues here. Now, here's a final question on this issue. Is that defamation? Well, if we're going to say yes, first we have to spot the lie in the statement. Based on what Zach said, it is true that he had a criminal record, although it has been expunged at this point. But as far as I've seen, Zach has not admitted or denied anything about that criminal record being a felony. And importantly, we don't know what that conviction is actually for. Zach has flat out said that he never robbed a liquor store. So if we take what Zach is saying is true, then Logan lied about Zach being a felon for a conviction for armed robbery of a liquor store. And if that's true, let's take a look at the requisite intent that's needed for defamation. Like I did earlier in the video, let's see if this meets the actual malice standard. To answer that, let's turn first back to the criminal history sheet that Logan shared in his reaction video. He points out how one charge appears to show obstruction of legal process.
He spent time in prison for multiple felonies, one for aggravated robbery, armed robbery at a liquor store, and the other for, surprise, obstructing the legal process.
So we would expect this supposed other charge to also be on a sheet just like this one. Logan doesn't show it. And if Zach says that it didn't happen, and Logan is saying that he got that information about the first charge from this sheet, where did he get the information for the second one?
This one was invented by a writer. Pure fiction. We made it up.
Okay, but seriously, if Logan is pointing to this document and he just assumes that Zach robbed a liquor store, even if Logan was given that information by someone else and he just trusted it, it does seem pretty reckless not to ask where these background check records say that Zach was convicted of armed robbery of a liquor store, especially if he can see on this document that there is a charge on the document for the first one. So to me, this does look like he's being at least reckless about the truth or falsity of the statement that he's making, which would be actual malice. But that said, I am open to all facts here because I want to have this analysis be as objective as possible. So I would be curious to see if Logan Paul had any sort of defenses on that point that I simply don't know about at this point. But those are my thoughts. This is insanity and a complete legal dumpster fire, in my opinion. What do you think? Let us know in the comments down below. Special thanks to members of Byte Club who are supporting this channel, whether through YouTube memberships or supporters on Locals, supporters on Patreon. We often talk about subjects that YouTube does not like to monetize, so your support means so much to this channel. And to everybody else watching, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this or at least found it interesting or informative, and if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more content like this and you haven't done so already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded. See you in the next video.